Come on. There it goes. Bam.
Hey, this is Erik Kleinsmith, and you're watching the Break It Down Show.
Yes, love it. I love doing this. I love getting that. Look, it's like the first time in history, Eric, that we don't have to live in the same place. You were my commander 30 years ago. I mean, not exactly 30 years ago, like 29 years and 100 days or whatever ago. We hit
Right.
30. When did you take over Delta Company? What date was it?
I showed up in Bosnia in March
Okay.
of that year, and what they did is I came there specifically to take Delta Company, but I had to get acclimatized. So I spent from March until August 5th, and I only know that because that was our move date. We did the change of command ceremony in that nasty coal plant industrial complex, and then immediately closed everything down and moved to I think it was out of Lukovac, and then we moved to Base Camp Steel Castle, which was a secondary airstrip for the Yugoslav army before the war, which was essentially an open field with minefields down around the southern side. So, and then from August until we came back in November, and then all through the next year.
It's funny when you deploy a lot, you start to see the kind of ground the engineers pick for us to live in, and sometimes it's here's what we've got, here's where we're going to make camp. And, even that is got an intel element to it, because it may not be the right place, because the engineer may pick the wrong place, not knowing that it's wrong because of some other reason that they couldn't know.
We were kind of leftovers, because the base camp was already division artillery and engineers, corps engineers. And the engineers came from 82nd Airborne. And I know that because one of the missions for our LRS long range surveillance company was constantly to monitor the mass graves down near Srebrenica. So they were arranging convoys every day to go down there to check them, watch them, and do annotations, that kind of thing. And they got into an accident with the 82nd Airborne engineers on the way back on some mountain pass. Of course, instead of getting out and talking about it, they all got out, and there was a 20-person brawl in the middle of this rural road. So I had to do the 15-6 investigation on that. So I remember all that. But it wasn't bad. It was better conditions than Lukovac, because we were in a chemical factory. It was just nasty conditions. Everything had coal dust on it. It turned brown. Even going to the gym was hazardous to your health. That's why I would never go running outside around that base camp.
It's funny, when we first got there, it was very frustrating. Delta Company was not well run. It's hard to deploy. All these things go together. And we got scattered around to our tents and everything. And then we were all like tucked up in our tent, and you'd wake up and there'd be like this almost like mist of coal dust on you. And you're inside a tent.
Right.
And so instantly all of our nasal passages started reacting to this stuff. And so everybody starts going to the doctor.
Yeah.
And the doctor says, it's okay. That particulate is too large to harm you.
Have you ever heard of black lung? I mean, there's a reason, they have that issue with miners. I mean,
I know, yeah. And like the ground there was pasted with coal dust. And so it was black, and it was everywhere. It was on everything. And you're telling me that you've measured all of the particulate here and we're fine. And then you would see like when the water would pool up, it would be oily, because of the drainage off of the coal.
It was so bad that somebody, and I know some paratroops, probably they climbed up to the top of the tallest building, which was used as a conveyor belt system to process the coal into coke. They hung a Batman symbol on top of it, huge 8 foot by 4 foot piece of plywood that they dragged up there and hung it up there. And then with a week later, somebody else shimmied up there and hung a big green question mark over the Batman symbol. And that finally the word came out. I was like, all right, quit it. Somebody's going to get themselves killed, because we get it. This place is called Gotham. It's a horrible place to live, but this is what we picked. And the division rear was there as well. And when they moved out, they decided to go to Croatia, which was much nicer. You could get your cell phones actually would work. Whereas we got stuck moving over to Lukovac, which like the tail end of this base camp. Our tents were laying on the ground. It was just from the start, it was a difficult time just to start from scratch and rebuild your living conditions. Thank God we had folks that knew how to do basic construction, and we had people that could persuade the brown and root guys to do some help, give us some help.
Yeah, and I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this, but there's some reality in what we're talking about, and how you survive as a unit, anyway, in the stack of units.
Yeah.
So we get there, we get to Lukovac. That made all of us. And we don't know what we're supposed to do. We know what our basic job is, but this is a completely new way to do it. We have all this digital stuff that we don't know how to work, or nobody's comfortable with, or we don't anticipate that amount of work. Like, we don't know how to process that, and so. We're all desperate to get the hell out of Lukovac, right? And so we were a general support team. General support, everybody is like, hey, we're in the bullpen, ready to go somewhere. We know we're going to be used, but we don't know where you're going to go yet. And so you might get a temporary assignment, go out and come back, go out and come back, and that is hard living for a team. That's really hard living. And so once you get your assignment, you know that local commander will grab you and hold on to you, and you're not going to leave. So you had to shop carefully on where you wanted to stay, what the mission was going to be, but also get the hell out of bad situations. And some units just weren't wired to have a group of spies and interrogators show up. And so, like, we went to one place and like, oh, we don't have anywhere for you to live. Like, what was set up in that tarmac over there? Like, oh no, you can't live on tarmac bare. You have to be on an elevated platform.
Yeah.
We don't have any platforms, right? So all these contingencies determine where and what you're going to do.
I firmly believe that the U.S. Army learned some good lessons, but learned a lot of bad lessons about deployment and what was the priority. I mean, somebody would accidentally pop a round off in a safe barrel. You clear your weapons before you leave, before you enter any of the base camps. So you clear them into a barrel, and somebody accidentally has a accidental discharge. That became a major investigation. Went all the way up the chain. Days of inquiry had to take place, witness statements, everything. And it's like, I'm absolutely positive that we did not. That we at first we're going to carry a lot of those bad habits on what was a priority into the Middle East, and finally it was just like, all right, we need to scrap this and go light. This is incredibly silly. I mean, I worked on a PowerPoint presentation for our commander to take over to another base camp, and I worked until such a late hour in the morning. I must have worked until 3 a.m. trying to work on these slides so that we could brief some General Mukti Muck who was coming in, soon. And I fell asleep at 3. The dining building of Lukovac, it caught fire early in the morning. The cooks that were there. One of the cooks died from the explosions of the fuel bottles. Another one was burned so bad he had to be medevaced out. The fuel bottles were exploding, and so we thought we were under a mortar attack. And what really upset me is that I slept through the whole thing. Yeah. And it was only until Chaz Owen came and banged on my door. I said, "Why are you not awake?" So I was like, "I just fell asleep 2 hours ago." And he said, we may be under attack. And I was so pissed off that the priority to get these slides were so important that I was combat ineffective if something actually was going to happen.
Yeah.
That to me was ridiculous.
That second cook passed away in San Antonio at the burn center. Didn't make it, right? So it's horrible. That's right. And but you're right though. I used to call these things like $10 million meetings. You've got 40 people practicing, so you can practice for the meeting that you're going to practice for before you deliver the meeting. Right. And you just got a lot of very senior staff sitting there. Yeah. I mean, and not all units do that, but a lot of units do.
Right. And I remember the briefing was for General Abrams, who was the 5th Corps commander at the time. And I got word back. I mean, we had it might have been your team that had to use a trip system, which is laptop, printer, all that scanner, all that stuff, in order to keep working on the slides, because the commander didn't like them, and it was happy to glad, kitty the cat, don't use yellow on white, that kind of thing. And they were working on it while the vehicles were en route to the other base camp to give the briefing. And it just astounded me of the amount of work they had to go in. And so I finally asked when they came back, said, how'd it go? And he goes, oh, the general hated it. That's like, what happened? He goes, he wanted to know why his units and his command, there were so many of his corps that were down here supporting only half of his corps. Why the priority was to make these glorious slides. What were they not doing soldier wise because they had spent all their time working on? And it was some, I remember one of them was a silly train coming out of a tunnel, which was a euphemism for we're moving into the future out of the darkness. And it was just, what are you talking about? Put black print on white slides, move out. That kind of thing.
3 bullets and the truth, just bam,
right.
bam, bam.
Right.
So just people understand in this time, this really is the dawn of the digital age in terms of deployments. And so the ability to navigate PowerPoint, and when I say PowerPoint, don't picture today PowerPoint, think about 30 years ago PowerPoint, it existed.
Right.
And so my ability, Eric, to go to a BCTC. Okay, so there was exercises, everybody, that you would go to, and the Army's trying to do Army things, and counterintelligence doesn't play well with the exercise because they're trying to do Army things and we're trying to save their ass from bad things. And so these things just don't gel well. And so our script writers are my peers in the unit. And so we're playing the role of the team on the ground, and then our script writer, but we weren't allowed to play with the big unit. So we would bring in this information and they would say, what the hell are you talking about? Like, we weren't part of the big exercise. And this all kind of goes to where we're going to end up with gaming. And my ability to hook up a digital camera to a laptop and print out a picture was so earth-shattering to all of you got to imagine, like, I'm in my mid-20s at this point. I've used word processors. I know how to keyboard, not type, keyboard, right?
Yeah.
And my ability to do that was mind-bending to people who had fought in Vietnam or were older than that. And so I took a picture and I flipped it. It was a major, and I turned her into a bad guy, and I kind of like drew on her face. Like, I made it comical in that, like, obviously this is not the real person. Just because if you don't, it's possible. This is 100% true, everybody. This might have triggered a real response. Well, who is this person? No. This is all notion. It's not real. You know what I'm saying? And so that ability to manipulate PowerPoint was earth-shattering to people. I did a swirly line to represent Constantine, and I just duplicated it, cut and paste. This is not fancy. It would look like kindergarten stuff now, but back then, they're like, what? When I pulled the hard drive out of the laptop, the person's mind blew up. When I took the screen on the Trip Light, so everybody, and I'll shut up here in a second. This is how new this stuff was. The screen on this laptop, you could detach it and flip it around and put it down to display that for the person across from you. Even my boss, Sergeant Dashko, he didn't know that. So when I ripped that thing out of the laptop, he literally thought I just destroyed the laptop. And I looked at him, I'm like, calm down. And then I showed it. Now imagine I'd blown my boss's mind and I blew the boss's mind. So like, it's crazy the distance that we've come and all the things we had to learn. And you're right. Like, why the fuck are you guys making all these? And we only got worse with the PowerPoint thing. Captains spend hours on that shit.
Yeah, that's. I mean, there's a reason why they call it getting your PowerPoint tab, like a Ranger tab. If you work on any, especially if you're on any division staff, joint staff, operational level, all the way up to the strategic level, it just absolutely gets ridiculous. And I remember we're down in a tactical battalion, and I remember, and we called it the 1.44 megabyte barrier, where one slide had so many graphics on it, it was larger than we could fit on a single floppy disk. So we had to break it apart into different pieces. There's no transfer protocols. There's no Dropbox. There's no, I'll just email it to you or whatever. It was all, I'll send you the floppy disk. And so we had to have a stack of floppy disks and then reassemble this briefing on the other side of where it needed to go in order to do that. The Army had only been in the PowerPoint for 2 years. Before that, it was like maybe 4 or 5 years with Harvard Graphics, 2.3, 2.4, and then finally, and then PowerPoint came in and I say changed everything. But we're still using it 30 years later. So
yeah. And a lot of stuff was done in AS400, and you're like, what is Pete even talking about? Because these things are so obsolete. One more thing on that, like that idea of simply grabbing the classified information on a digital format, whether it's a hard drive, floppy, an actual floppy disk, not the hard kind. The ability to do that and move it instantly around the battlefield changed how we did courier orders too. Now it had to be like just a simple card that you didn't need the whole old Russian era structure.
You need the attaché case with your handcuffs, cuffing yourself to it, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. And by the way, I'm carrying a laptop everywhere I go, which has classified on it, but I have to
Right.
carry this thing everywhere. And so, like, it gets all crazy. Anyhow, when you we want to talk about gaming today, and so when we look at the gaming world, it's so incredible. We've had a bunch of people on that focus in this space, wherever it is, and a lot of them are contracted to the military to help with this. So I guess,
Yeah.
how did you get into gaming? Because you're deep into it. Like, you even paint the characters and
Oh
everything else.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you've got the pictures I sent you, but
I do.
I started into gaming when I was 8 years old in 1970. I want to say 74. Yeah, when my brother received this game for his birthday, and it's affectionately known as Gettysburg 58. But before that, I mean, it was from a fairly new company called Avalon Hill, Avalon Hill is a suburb of Baltimore. So the designer came out of there, and it was just a fairly simple game to allow you to recreate the Battle of Gettysburg. And but this is really the start. With then was really into hardcore war gaming, and so I mean, go to the next one. But from that time on, I mean, my first game that I bought, I saved up my $10 or $15, and I bought Wooden Ships and Iron Men, which is a game about the age of sail, with the British Navy, American, French, Spanish. And then we started gobbling up games as fast as we could afford them as kids. We were buying these games. Third Reich was World War II. Lord of the Rings was based on, obviously, the books, not the movie, because there was nothing else out there to do any of this kind of thing. But what it really turned into was is the kids in the neighborhood. We would play it. We played Third Reich with like 4 or 5 of us. Is primarily my oldest brother and I. Our middle brother was just not into this kind of thing. But that's really how it started. But again, it's like very cheap graphics in terms of today. Go to the next one. It's like, I think it was finally in 77 when Dungeons and Dragons first came out, and we actually our first one was a game called Tunnels and Trolls, and this was, nobody had any miniatures, nobody had anything. We used a ceiling tile that my dad brought home. He was an elementary school principal, and we used graph paper and we used push pins to move, and we drew on the graph paper what the dungeon would look like, and we just rolled our dice. We'd move our little push pins around. That's all we could afford. And that's how we played it for years. And we finally got our hands on the first copy of Dungeons and Dragons. Go to the next one, and this is first edition, but it's known as the blue box or the blue starter set. I mean, the art in this thing, that's why I put the art next to this to show you. The art was just completely basic compared to some of the fantastic, AI generated content, even before AI generated content, just some of the fantastic artists that were out there. I mean, this is just some very basic stuff. We just had, you had something different than 6-sided dice. So you had your 20-sided, your 8-sided, and we just played in a camper or wherever we went. We had maybe a handful of miniatures, but it was mostly work on paper, using graph paper, just saying, okay, now we're here. And you had to do a lot of descriptive and work and that kind of thing. What really made this interesting, this is way, if you think about as the board game community as it broke away from your standard games that everybody knows, Monopoly, Risk, Parcheesi, that kind of stuff. It really broke away and started getting more, required you to do more critical and strategic thinking. And then it also required you it started to get more and more immersive. And so the way I compare it is if you think of reading, you read the whole set of books of whatever topic, whatever story, Hunger Games, Lord of the Rings, Hobbit, Divergent, whatever that series. The movies are much, obviously much more people, many more people have watched the movies than have read the books. And there's always somebody saying, well, it wasn't like the book, or they just didn't do justice or whatever. Board gaming is now more of an interactive version of a novel or of a book. And video games are the movie version of that. So it's an interactive video platform. And so that's really kind of the relationship between the two. And so you can read a book, and I read The Hobbit by the time I was 9 years old. I read The Lord of the Rings in middle school. Was just diving into this other books that I could, Starship Troopers, Robert Heinlein, a couple of different ones from him, the Isaac Asimov, I jumped into him. There was just several of them out there, these old classics, because there was nothing else. We were dying for something. You die when a movie like Excalibur comes out in 1980, or Conan comes out. I can't remember. I think it was 81 or something like that. The original Conan, and then Conan the Destroyer. It was just, oh my gosh, finally somebody's making a movie about something really that we thought just was really cool. It allows you to become somebody else. And that's what role playing started to do. Fun things. It was great for us growing up, but then along the road, along the way, go to the next one, is this game came out, Squad Leader. And it's a 1977. This is an original game, again, back to Avalon Hill, but this was squad level combat for World War II, and it was just 12 scenarios with a whole bunch of counters, so you could play the Russians, the Germans, or the Americans. They gave you historically written scenarios that you could play. The one on the right is a scenario from Stalingrad and the other one's like Western Russian, but the maps were modular, so you could use them for anything. This became the be all, the end all for tactical war gaming for us. It was one of the first of its kind. It just was a real changer for us. This game now still exists, but now it's called Advanced Squad Leader, and it has gotten so onerous and complicated. There's a very, very small core group of players that get into this one. But you essentially got to have your PhD in the game in order to really understand it and really play it. Yeah. The amount of decisions. I was on a year-round schooling. So I was because I was younger than my brothers. I had to stay at home for 3 weeks at a time by myself while my dad worked and my mom taught kindergarten. So I would be home with these games. And I just play them myself. By the time I was in 7th or 8th grade, I knew how to deploy an American World War II rifle company, to include where to put crew serve weapons, where to find the choke points, how to do the terrain analysis. I didn't know any of the doctrinal stuff. I didn't know what OCOCA meant, observations and fields of fire, cover and concealment, key terrain, avenues of approach. But I was playing that as if, trying to figure that out as much as possible. I started learning about the weapon systems, the organization, the leadership aspect of it, where you put your leader with the main effort, you put your secondary leader with the secondary effort. There's all kinds of things that you started to learn. So when I finally did join the military, and I was a tanker for 2 years, M1 tank platoon leader. Then I was a scout reconnaissance leader. So I had 10 Humvees with no tops, no doors, no windshields. This was out in Colorado, and then we had to go to Fort Irwin a couple times. But and then finally, when I switched over to do intelligence, the first unit they assigned me to was a mechanized infantry battalion, and then right after that, the 3rd Brigade, 3rd Infantry Division in Germany, and we do all kinds of exercises, preparing for deployment, that kind of thing in the early 90s. And I remember sitting down with my brigade commander, and he's like, you seem like you're a natural at what you're doing. And I finally just said, look, I've been doing this since I've been 8 years old. You're just paying me for it. That's really how I thought of it. Beside the fact of all the military aspects, living the military life and that kind of thing. When it got right down to the core purpose of why I was supposed to be there for a unit, every unit in the Army has a tactical intelligence officer. From battalion up, or division or group of officers, and NCOs and soldiers that all work together to try to template and understand what the enemy is doing. So that's really, how part of getting into it. I really wish, growing up, we always wished that our dad would play, but he was too busy. He was very interested and supportive and everything. It was, my dad was killed when I was 15. I was between my sophomore and junior year in high school. So part of another reason why I joined the Army, besides, obviously I'm overwhelming patriotism, is is to get to know what my dad's life was like, because he was in the 7th Cavalry for a time. So that was a piece of it. But so all those things came together. But I still game, and we'll show you some other stuff. Go to the next one. You probably recognize the next one. On the left is the is a World War II game, and this is using a different. As now you get into what's called the beginning of the board game renaissance, and this is early 2000s. This is Axis and Allies. There was a series of games there was a Roman Empire one called Conquest of the Empire. We played that in college until I think all night, till late in the morning. But these use area controls instead of getting bogged down into these hexes and counters with information on them. What you did is you use miniatures that signify different things like tanks or whatever. The one on the right is it's called Distant Plain, and it's actually the campaign in Afghanistan. Obviously, you recognize the country and the area, but it's a series of games called COIN, which stands for Counterinsurgency Campaign. So the game company that came out with this is called GMT Games, one of my favorite gaming companies now. They have a series of these. There's one for Cuba Libre, which is the Castro fight for Cuba. There's one for Caesar subjugating the Gauls called Falling Skies. I've not played the series just because it's too right now with work and everything. It's too much for me to get into as a system. But so many of them. But you get into these kind of area control games. This is really taking risk to the 3rd, 4th, and 5th levels beyond that.
Let me jump in here because I want to ask you. Afghanistan in particular is a hard place to fight and win. And so I don't know how they control for this or if they even bother. It can just be like, hey, it's a cool place to talk about. But you've got all these districts, and there's one big ring route, everybody, that goes around like kind of the main district, or the main provinces, the main states of Afghanistan.
Right.
And even us in the modern times, that brigade commander would show up and say, we will push south, encircle, and destroy the Taliban. And then the intel guide room got to go, sir, no, you won't. You got to say that in a way that they won't annihilate you. Right. But the reality is those mountains look awful flat on that board, right? But if you take tired old equipment in really, really impossibly rugged situations, man, you find yourself. I saw this wonderful slide. It told the story of this small team that had their Humvee kind of rock roll and then fall over, and they had to self-recover. Mm-hmm. And so this briefing talked about, and it was within the big brief. It was just a simple update. But I'm like, oh my God, these 5 guys, couple NCOs, they ratchet strapped their vehicle from sideways to vertical again, using rocks and everything. And it was a marvelous story of, NCO toughness.
Right.
It also was a marvelous story of, hey, look, this is how hard it is to simply drive around this terrain. These guys had flipped there. No one got hurt, but that's how hard it was just to do the simplest thing. So how is that? Is it represented in there? Is that unfair? Because it's really easy to think you're just going to push your tanks and your striker brigade south and do things, but you're not.
You have to have a simplicity of one. You have to be able to write a rules mechanic. And that's really the challenge for all these designers that have games out, is you have to be able to capture it as realistically as possible without bogging the person down into the minutia of this doesn't feel like a game anymore. This feels like work. And there's a notorious game, and they featured it on The Big Bang Theory years ago, but it's called Campaigns in North Africa, and it's from a company called Strategic Publications, SPI. And the game is so onerous. It's the North African World War II campaign that they had a test run of 12, I think it was 12 guys that played it. And I read it. This was from an article, and it took them longer to play 2 weeks of the game than it was in real life. Yeah. Because you had to account for every division's fuel and supplies and feeding, and it was just this legit. And you had to fill out all these forms in order. It was just a logistical nightmare to play the game. And so it's like, it was fantastic. I'm sure the guy who put it into it, it's his opus dei of design, but it's a completely unplayable game. And there are several that I just won't touch because it's like this, part of it, you have to have a fun factor to be involved. And that goes into some of the learning too. Nobody wants to learn a game if you're not into that. If you're not into gaming, it's going to be harder for you. You're not going to want to learn it just to learn the topic area. But if you are, and if you do understand that, gaming is a huge motivator for learning. And there's a whole series. I mean, PhDs have been written in books on the gamification of learning and why that becomes important. So you can read about a topic all day long. You could read about the history of the Afghan war, for months and months. But when you've played it and you say, well, now I've played the Taliban, now I have to think like them now, or as much as possible, or at least find a way to defeat the Americans and defeat the Afghan nationals. I have to think about all these different strategies. And so when you go back and read about it, it's like, you know what, I can relate to that decision making because I had to make those similar decisions there.
Yeah. So you had a little bit of familiarity. I recall learning how to, in a sergeant's time, and sergeant's time's like, hey, we're going to take a couple hours off every week and just work on military skills.
Yeah.
And so we would learn things like, and again, we're spies, so we have a lot of stuff to master.
Right.
And we would learn things like bounding Overwatch.
Right.
I had the first clue about that. And then we would try to simulate it. And everybody would do their best to do their best, but it wasn't all that helpful because it was ponderous. You'd go out, you'd walk around. You're like, what is the point of this whole thing? Why are we? Because while you're walking around, you're actually just walking around. You're not training per se, right? So, I hadn't learned the term or learned about company in the defense or platoon or any of these kind of things because we just had no time to cover all of the things that we needed to have some kind of familiarity with.
Yeah.
And so the gaming side makes a lot of sense to me. And as I matured in my career, I saw more and more of it creeping into the day-to-day operations. And, like the units that I was in, like the S3 at the company level, or the operations officer, everybody at the company level often took the young guys, including NCOs, and said, let's play these games.
Yes. Yeah. And gaming is essentially a part of training. But even your BCTPs, which stood for, I think it was Brigade Command Training Program or something like that.
Yeah, and training package program, whatever. Yeah.
And it was actually, essentially that was a game. And, we had to go out, deploy to Grafenwehr, sit in a parking lot, write the master event list for all the counter intel stuff that was going on. We never really got any training. All we were doing was training aids and training props for the Corps Command to do their and divisions to do their exercises. The folks that would run them were folks that came out from the Army, from Fort Leavenworth, the Combined Arms Learning Center, the call or whatever it's called. They would come out and you had retired generals, retired colonels. They would play the opposing force. They would do the evaluation. They would do the consulting as part of it. So understanding what objectives you wanted to train on, but everything was done by computer systems and folks out in, you worked in your tactical operations center, but you're out in a parking lot just to make it easier and cost effective. So that was, again, that's gamification. In fact, skip the next one, but go one more. From this point out, these are all my photos, but the one on the right is actually a photo I took from my armor officer basic course in 1988. And there's a game that they had put out called Dun Kampf, and it was essentially fold a gap and you had micro armor, little metal tanks and BMPs and 113s, armored personnel carriers. And so you had to maneuver those, and you had maps that would 1 to 50,000 maps that would correspond with this plastic press board. I think it might have been metal, terrain boards, and you had to talk to each other. If you weren't standing next to each other, you had to talk to each other as if you were on the radio. You had to, so it was a way to coordinate your platoon with the platoon next to you. I mean, that's what they did. It was a very cheap way to do that. And you could do scout and reconnaissance. You could do call for fires, all the tactical things that that you could use. So, you spend more time. I mean, you're spending 90% of your time in the military training.
Yeah.
And if you're not training, you're doing the operation itself, and even then, you're doing lessons learned from the operation.
When I don't know about other units because I was in a counterintelligence unit, but when we deployed to the field, this is before you got there. There was a lot of just downtime. Like we went to Grafenwehr. We're going to do range density, and then it was the least dense thing ever. Like I never got to fire the 9mm because we had a bunch of shitty marksmen who couldn't qualify, so we had to get them through. And they're like, "Oh, we ran out of 9mm." I'm like, I didn't even get to shoot.
Wow. Yeah.
By the way, let me shoot first because I can shoot a pistol. I'll qualify expert. You get to hang. No. Okay, great. So it wasn't dense and it was dumb. And so we spent a lot of time playing spades. We spent a lot of time playing Risk. And the one thing I learned about Risk is when you have a bunch of smart people, because spies are smart, and you play Risk the way you always play Risk, that wasn't going to work because you were going to get outfoxed. More importantly, you were going to get out negotiated.
Right.
And so our level, and this is just a very simple version of Risk. It's not fancy at all. It's just same 3 dice pieces, but you had to adapt your game in a way that you couldn't, like your friends, you could just roll over them because you knew how the game worked, but that was no longer key. And boy, there was some great conversations on what to do next and what not to do. And even though you're competing players, if you can impose your will on somebody, like let's say you and I are both trying to take out Bob, whoever Bob is, if I could use, like, I could see your weaker position and say, hey, if you can sacrifice this country, I'll protect you over here and make you subordinate to me in a game where you're supposed to try to win.
Right. And I won't play Risk anymore because there is a formula to it. And if you've played enough times, you know the formula, and you know that the first person to get that linchpin set of reinforcement, that there's a tipping point you reach, is whoever hits the tipping point, the game's over. And it's within 20, 30 minutes if you're doing it right. And so I think I got invited over, I think it was Sergeant Mowbray and Barraclough invited me over because they lived right across the street from me in the Langen housing. And I said, hey, we're going to play Risk. And I went over there and I pounded them. I said, look, I'm telling you, there's a formula to this game. I didn't win it because I was smart. I've just played it so much that I know what the formula is. So that's, I mean, again, you got to make it playable so that it gets into that. I mean, I got picture on the left is 15mm metal miniatures from a company called Essex out of England. And this is my Egyptian army. And I used this for years. I think for 7 years, I went into my kids' high school and taught military history to every 9th grade student. At first, it was just my son's class. And then they said, hey, we want to get some other classes in. And then it became, can you do this for 2 days? And I taught them the Battle of Kadesh, which is between the New Kingdom Egyptians under Ramses and the Hittite Empire under Muwatallish. And the kids, you get they had 4 rows. They put me in the theater after a while, but they have 4 rows of students would come in. The first row was your absolute boys that were totally geeked out about history and everything, and saw it when they came in. I want a front row seat. And I would pick a pharaoh, and I would pick a king, and I would require them to pick 2 generals to come down with them. At least one of them had to be a boy or a girl, because I wanted to get the girls involved. Because behind them in the second row were the girls that were geeked out about it, or the girls that were there's always a subgroup that was really more interested into the painting and how you put stuff together. And then you get the kids in the background. It's like, I don't care, whatever. I just want to get through this. But by the end, I did it in an interactive way. They all had a great time. And so they asked, the teachers at the school asked, can you do one in the spring for a later period? And I said, sure, I can do. So I did Agincourt. And at that battle, which was 1415, they knew there's records of who was there, who lived, who died, who was captured, everything. And so what I did is I gave out playing cards to each of the kids, and it had a name of somebody on there. So whoever was Henry V, I had them come down. Whoever was, I'm trying to remember the name of the French commander because he wasn't the king, brought them down. And then I would bring down different actors at different times. So the teacher started feeding me the information, like make sure this kid is the king because we know he's going to be a good actor. Make sure this kid plays the French commander. And there's a kid that causes a lot of problem. I said, no problem. I gave him a French commander who died within the first 15 minutes of the battle. So he was no longer allowed to talk because he was dead, that kind of thing. And so you got you held your card, and you found out at the end whether you lived or died. And it's kind of playing off of when you go to the Holocaust Museum in DC. You get somebody that you walk through, and most of them, if you were French, you probably weren't going to make it. The kids don't know that, but but just getting that whole story, I still get kids that say, "Oh, you were the miniatures guy. I remember you." And this was like 5 years ago. Was my last. I stopped doing it after COVID. But that's just to give you as a point of reference, the little tip down there. That's the tip of a magic marker. So that's how small these really small. When they say 15 millimeters, it's measurement of the height of the person up to their eyes. And so that's a lot. Most of your Dungeons and Dragons are 25 millimeters, and now with and I'll show you some of the other ones as they come up. But now as you get into some of the more epic stuff, it's just they get larger and much more detail and that kind of thing. But these were made out of lead, or not lead, pewter metal, so it was a soft metal to work with, but was also difficult to work with.
When you look at your experience gaming, obviously, you're able to beat people at Risk. Okay, yeah, that's great. But how do you apply that, when you're an officer, whether you're in command or working in support of operations or the operations officer? How do you start to apply that? And then also, it's the military. How do you mentor that capability into people?
You start doing some close read. In fact, I'll give you an example. Go to the next one. My brother and I would play in different conventions. There's some great conventions around the country. This one is the one that we go to a lot is called Historicon, and it's done by the Historical Miniature Gaming Society. It's in Pennsylvania, Lancaster or Gettysburg, those areas. It's an hour and a half, 2 hour drive away. And give examples, like we signed up for a game for the Battle of Saratoga for American Revolution. These are all my minis. This is from a game in my basement a little while ago. And we were paired with a father and son who were as nice as can be. And then we were also paired with an Air Force colonel. And at the time I was an Army captain, my brother was a Marine major. And when we started playing this game, and we were the British, and I know, so I started doing my intel work. I started watching him. I started looking at the table and the terrain, and what I realized very early on was that this Air Force colonel was also talking trash about us because he had been to the War College. He had been, whatever rank and Joint Staff and whatever he had been doing. And he's just like, look, you guys don't have a chance, whatever. But I noticed very early on that he was deliberately protecting one unit, and it was Morgan's Riflemen. And these were your backwoods outdoor frontiersmen, were the elite forces of the skirmish forces of the American Army at Saratoga. But the gorgeous miniatures, whoever had painted them, and he kept pushing them back and retreating them because he didn't want to see any casualties to those figures. He didn't want to see them going away or whatever. And as soon as I realized that, I leaned over to my brother as I keep pushing. If you keep pushing Morgan's rifles back, and I'll throw my Indians and skirmishers across this road, we will own this entire map. And it was so bad and so brutal that folks were coming from other tables. Like they said, this is Saratoga. This isn't even close to what it was supposed to be. And it's just because that guy, we figured out that guy's personality he had a flaw in his thinking, and it stood out. That's the kind of thing that you start to learn. Now take that into the business world and negotiations, the art of the deal. Take that into, even your counterintel work. You start working. You start. It all works. It all helps you build up for professional development. So anytime I had a chance to do any kind of war game, and we tried to do it when I was active duty, it just took too long. The games are designed to take forever, so you can't do it in a sergeant's time. One Thursday morning little thing. Even when I was an intel instructor, we would set up games in empty cubes in our office, like History of the World or something like that. And whoever signed up for the turn, they take their turn, and then they'd send an email like, all right, whenever your turn is. And like, I'll get around to it tomorrow or the next day. But it took us several weeks, but we had a game running in the office for weeks.
Yeah. It's interesting. The simple games, even like Stratego, there's a lot more if you chose to win. There's a lot more going on, know. And anybody that remembers Stratego, it's a fairly simple game. It's sort of chess like, and if you like, I would deploy my bombs in a spot where my general was not.
Yeah.
And so you would spend a lot of time and manpower trying to clear my bombs, trying to find them. Meanwhile, I've got a high level, warrior next to him that I could use to sort of protect that general. And I just kind of, and then I acted, oh boy, oh geez, and for as long as that ruse worked, and I would consume them. And meanwhile, I'm doing my side on the offense.
Right.
Meanwhile, like my general was exposed the entire time. It's just, because that's a way to deceive your opponent into overcommitting something. And does it win every time? No, but I won a lot because I just didn't follow the normal pattern. And that was something that for sure, Erik, applied to how I approached counterintelligence.
Oh, sure. I mean, I even, you can read a book about whatever it is, but when you're practicing it, that's what I mean. You're practicing the art of deception.
Yep.
And you're reading somebody, and then, next time you go into a meeting, or you're doing an interview with a less than forthcoming person, you're starting to game them. It just becomes a natural thing. It's not an evil or sinister thing or Machiavellian thing. It's just you start being more attuned and more empathetic to what somebody else is thinking or what they're feeling. So go hit the next one for me. See if you recognize this one. This is from a con, the historic HCMS convention that takes place. That didn't come out good. But this is the Alamo, and the guy actually had the entire Alamo laid out there. You're only showing a portion of it, but that was the entire Alamo that was laid out. And so you're learning about the battle, but you can just say, I learned about that because I was part of the Tennesseans that defended that wall. That's you're looking at the Alamo from a reverse angle from the area where one of the avenues that the Mexican army attacked. And so that gives you just an idea of that. And then go to the next one too. So I see. Hopefully this one comes out. All right. So this is actually a collection that I had. It's a Star Wars game, obviously. I painted all these minis, and so this was one from a company called Fantasy Flight Games called Star Wars Imperial Assault. And it was actually a role-playing game where you took on a character as a rebel. You didn't have to create it like Dungeons & Dragons, spend hours figuring out who you were, that kind of thing. They now, a lot of games now, they're just pre-made. It's like you pick one of four or whatever, all the expansions and everything that comes with it. I ended up selling my entire collection of this game because I was just, years later done playing it. I sold this for $1,100.
Geez, really? Wow.
I mean, on eBay. Somebody in Indonesia bought it and, wrote me and said, these are fantastic. I got the entire collection, that kind of thing. And as soon as I told my wife that I sold it, the first thing she said was, what'd you spend the money on? Because she knows that's justifiable equity for me, so I can go out and buy some more stuff. But and she's another reason why I won't play Risk, because the last time I played, she beat me.
Retired. I just retired. Thank you.
She was able. I knew where the tipping point was, and she was able to get there first. And she probably wasn't even thinking about it, but she hit it. I was like, "There's no way I'm going to win."
Yeah, that's funny.
So she continually reminds me of that.
Yeah. And then what do? Like, you can play an atypical way and try to defeat. There's always that chance of doing something. If they don't know that they've got it. But you're right. Like you're running out of options.
Yeah, I mean there is a great game that I have everything on it, all the original, the expansions, and everything, and it's called Chronicles of Crime. And what this one does is you're solving a crime, but what it does is it gives you the scenario, and you have to use your phone to scan QR codes for. First, you go to the crime scene, and somebody does a 3D viewing and just reads off while somebody else is just pulling cards out that have QR codes. Like, okay, I see a box of pencils, I see a knife, bloody knife, I see a picture that's broken, something like that. And so you're pulling out these cards. And as you play the game, you go to the different characters and you're interrogating them. You're asking them questions, and you're doing it by scanning QR codes and then asking questions from that. So you say, I want to ask this person about this knife. And you scan the person, then you scan the knife. And every time you do something, it ticks off a time. 5 minutes here, 20 minutes to move to a new location. And you have the entire day to solve this crime. And then they ask you a bunch of questions, and it gives you a score on how well you do. Honest to God, Pete, my wife and I played it with friends as well. They don't know anything about network analysis, social network analysis, link analysis. They are pulling out dry erase boards and drawing this person's link to this person. And it is, you don't have to have formal training to get into the thought process. And so this is what I recommend anybody who's doing any kind of CI or asymmetric threat analysis work to show linkages, because the company that makes it's actually a Polish. There's several Polish companies that make the best games right now. And this was a Polish company called Lucky Duck Games, and they actually wrote into the script, and it's built into the software that you use on your phone. The characters that you're interviewing will lie to you, or will change their story as the crime progresses throughout the day. So you can go back and say, you know what about this? Like, oh yeah, right, and then they'll change their story. So so you have to figure out and work through the lies through a logic tree using social network analysis.
Yeah, boy, that's great. It's funny when you don't have this sort of this approach to thinking, trying to outthink someone who's as smart or smarter than you, and trying to savvy through that.
Right.
Like if you're just playing against the machine all the time, for example, you don't have to deal with enough of the variables. We had these folks that had come out of college, and they were going to help us understand things like Islam when we were deployed.
Right.
But they were so far behind on what the conflict was in their minds. And I'm being a little broad brush here, but they were convinced that this was sectarian violence. And so they'd want to ask religious-based questions on leadership and everything. And it's like, hey, understand, some of this fight is Iraq being pushed down by Saudi Arabia and Iran together.
Yes.
And then I got a whole lecture on, you don't understand how Islam works. And I'm like, you don't understand how politics works. Right. So we go into the skiff, and I go to the big link analysis chart, and we're not worried about anything on the chart. I'm just looking for one link between Saudi Arabia and Iran that's there. And I know it. Look, I already know it's there, Eric, right? Like, without even knowing who it is or why or seeing the report. Right. I'm like, look, right here, bam. This is more political than you realize. Marja's the next. Okay, great. Go look into that. Right. But understand what's happening here is not necessarily a religious fight. There's religion in it, but you're not and that ability to take that person and jar their system changed and accelerated their performance on the ground to where they were a little more relevant. Now, look, you got a lot to learn when you're new and you don't know that, but just that one little test that showed like, hey, this is not what you think it is.
Right.
Forces you, if you allow yourself to be wrong about something, it'll force you to go, oh, I need to slow down and step back and make sure I get more things right and get less things wrong.
Yeah, the Western mind has a paradigm of separation between religion and the state, whereas Islam and Eastern religions, it is the state. Religion is politics, politics is religion, and we go to great lengths to separate that, but you now have to think in those terms. And that's part of immersing yourself into, and that's where a lot of gaming, it's immersion. I mean, and what I mean is, like, the board gaming industry is absolutely huge. The number of podcasters, the number of channels that they have that are strictly board games, strictly role-playing games, strictly just watching somebody play a video game. There is a great gaming convention. It's called Gen Con, and it rivals Comic-Con in San Diego. It started in Lake Geneva. That's why it's called Gen Con. Right down the street from Gary Gygax's home, the guy who invented Dungeons and Dragons. They charged I think $1 to get in, and they had 75 people show up, and they played Dungeons and Dragons and just games of all kinds. Today, Gen Con is 60,000 people show. It is in downtown Indianapolis at their convention center. and it's absolute board game renaissance. And now we're getting to the point where, as we start, you can get your kids into this, but as soon as they get to high school and college, they no longer have the time, the money, or the space. And it's not, and so they break off. There's a phase where they break off, and then they'll get back into it as an adult. My son and I got into playing Warhammer 40K. Is because my son did. He turned 10 and he got into it. So it's like, this is something I could re-energize, the hobby that I have and do it with him. And so we got into that. He now lives in another state, and he was just showing me the terrain board he has, and his 2 3D printers, a resin one and a filament printer that he uses to make his own stuff. And so he's done it in a different way. I learned early on that this generation's never going to play the hexes and counter the old-fashioned war game stuff. But for us old guys, to be honest, I mean, we're getting to the point where it's not a money factor. It's how much time do I have, even into retirement. Yeah. So go to the next one. This is one of the pits that you can fall into.
Oh my gosh.
This is a warehouse collection from a guy who had passed away. And he had left all of his games to his buddy, and then his buddy passes away. And he lives in Pennsylvania, and so he left all his games to his daughter, and his daughter for the first time has no mom or dad. She's a school teacher, has no idea what to do with this stuff. So a friend of mine who is into helping people out like this, we took control of 1,600 games that this guy had in a 10 by 20 storage locker. At 1,600 games, if you played every game for one day and then switched to another game, it would still take you 5+ years to play everything that you had. Yeah. And so now you're getting into where it's just getting overwhelmingly, there's just way too much, you're just kind of like, look, I think I bought too much, and for folks who play Warhammer, that's called your pile of shame, because you bought so many minis on gray plastic sprues. It's called your gray pile of shame. Is you just haven't got around to painting them. I got an entire dresser drawer full of boxes. I was like, I'll get to these guys eventually. I'll get to painting these guys. So go to the next one.
Okay.
So right now, this is part of my game room. I got a pirate game that I've gotten into called Blood and Plunder, and it's not a fantasy one. There's no serpents and mermaids and skeletons or zombies or anything like that. It's actual historical pirates. From the Pirate Republic. So your Sam Bellamy's, your Charles Vane, your Blackbeard, that kind of thing. So it's historical. So you're really, again, I'm learning more about the Pirate Republic. I've run out and read a bunch of books about it. And then on the right is just top shelf of my paint collection. So you see what goes into when we talk about painting, we're the absolute, you get into some of the aesthetic aspects. So I had a very stressful job years ago. So my work playing with my son coincided with the job that I had when I was working for Lockheed Martin. And it was extremely stressful. And it was, it got to the point where I'd come home from work and would have to de-stress by painting minis every night for 30, 45 minutes. And so my wife let me set something up at the kitchen table. 20+ years later, it's still sitting there at the kitchen table. I got a secretariat desk that I work out of, and I have this little rolling cart that I can put all my paints in. This is just one of 3 shelves worth of colors that I use. And so that itself has become therapeutic for me, just to do the painting while I'm watching a movie or something like that. And then this is just go to the last one. These are just 2 of the ones that I painted. I just wanted to show because I like to brag, but
I'm trying to
these are from Warhammer also. We do Warhammer 40K. You find out more and more. There are a lot of celebrities that have gotten into this aspect of it. Henry Cavill is big into 40K. There's Robin Williams was big into painting the miniatures for it. There's folks. Vin Diesel was. I remember seeing a picture of a birthday cake of his, which were the D&D manuals. That's what his birthday cake looked like. I'm a big fan of Rush, and so I had to make these Chaos Warriors. I had to make their banner look like 2112 from the Rush album. So that was part of my piece, like, you know what, you can paint it however you want. You can use whatever artistic pieces that you want to do. But just even learning how to paint the wings on the one on the left, I had to learn how to use some inks and diluted inks and dry brushing. And there's all kinds of techniques that you start picking up. I don't airbrush just because it's a pain in the butt to clean it. So, you know, but it's just that kind of thing. That becomes another part of the hobby.
This is more like your instead of playing a guitar or painting a canvas, this is sort of just your meditative hobby. And
absolutely.
And if nobody cares about it, you don't care because it's healthy for you. Is that
sure.
Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I have, you know, I have a gaming group. It's my brother. Sometimes both of my brothers, depending on if what we're playing. Guy that I've known since first grade, Army colonel, another Army colonel or a Marine colonel, and then another Army colonel that I went to the Intel school with. We've been friends for, you know, decades. And so we've been, every Sunday we come over, we're playing some game. So right now we got a game on the table called, ironically, Pirate Republic, but you're using small miniatures and you're maneuvering around the Caribbean and then the west coast of Africa. You know, and it's those kind of games that we do. Role-playing games. We'll do the, you know, one-off miniature battles. It just, you know, we just say, oh, what do you want to play next? Well, I got this new one in about World War II. All right, fantastic. We'll play it. You know, so I've got 2 custom-made tables that are, they have a recessed surface with a mouse pad lining. One of them's 3.5 feet by 5.5. Another one's 4 foot by 6 foot. That's my Warhammer miniature battle surface. I got them both down there in the basement. I've got all my artwork up down there. I mean, that's your little nerd lair, but there's not a, you know, folks have nerd layers for sports teams, with a pool table or whatever. You know, mine's full of, you know, several $1,000s and several thousand figures painted on the shelves and that kind of thing. So,
yeah, that's. I mean, the nerd layer thing, it's true, and I want to bring this back to like the practical application, and I think this will work. But I'm a believer that in our field, in intelligence, particularly counterintelligence, there's different kinds of people. There's you know, and there's nerds in each one of these groups. So there's the forward deployable people, the people. There's the operations people who help us understand how to operate one of these organizations. And then there's the people that are more analytical. And so when you're in a group like this and trying to help a commander, are you sort of sorting out like, hey, you know, this guy is using his, you know, does this help you mentor and determine the type of mentoring you need? Like, okay, yeah, Captain, you need to go write a peer review paper. That's one thing, but does this allow you to learn about the people that you're trying to guide to a better level, whether you're in a command position or just a leadership spot?
For partly, you know, it's like when you have to learn a game, you're learning a system as quickly as possible. Then you have to explain that game to everybody else. So you're learning how to absorb material as quickly as possible and then brief it within 10 minutes so everybody can get up to the same speed. Even during during the Able Danger group, we were looking at penetrations of terrorists in the U.S. Right. And we saw some bits and blips there and there, and it just happened to be that I was playing a game about the French and Indian War, and so we were seeing some blips in Toronto for terrorist activity there. There was a high Islamic fundamentalist group that was there. In fact, Ahmed Rassam, the Millennium bomber that tried to blow up LAX airport, he was hardened by out in Toronto at first, and then moved out to Vancouver, and that's how he got into the U.S. was driving across the border and got caught. But the reason why, you know, as we were doing some of the analysis, well beforehand, the first thing I thought of is like, we need to look at the rivers. And the other analysts like, what do you mean? Well, take a look at the St. Lawrence River. You've got Quebec, you've got Montreal, Toronto, and then you're into Detroit. And now you're into the U.S. And I said, I'm telling you right now, you will find terrorist activity in every one of those cities, and you'll find a connection between the two. That is the hunch that I'm going after. And I said, why is that? Because I'm playing a game on the French and Indian War, and that's a natural way to get into the interior of our country, even though you're using geography and it's 1999, 2000 timeframe. And what do you know? It all panned out. We were finding blips all over the place, up and down that St. Lawrence River.
Yeah, it's interesting how these lessons can come out and bear fruit, and you don't even know where that hunch comes from. Sometimes hunches are wrong, but you can't be afraid to try to play them.
Yeah.
And move forward. What else do we need to understand about game? By the way, everybody, we had an episode with a guy named Sebastian Bay who gets paid a lot of money to
build I know Sebastian. He's great.
Yeah. And here's the link for that episode, you guys too. So go watch that. But he gets paid a lot of money to go out and talk to young warriors, talk to seasoned warriors, and go, let's push your thinking about this. He's a veteran himself. So there's a really powerful community. And if this at all seems interesting to you, it's a great tool that you can apply to your own things or bring to your team. I'm not selling a thing here. I'm just letting you guys know that this is a powerful mechanism for learning how things work and how to exploit those things to your advantage. How did I do, Eric? Did I describe it okay?
That absolutely. And the other thing though is it just to have fun. I mean, my wife she comes down and she looks and goes, well, I'd really like to play this one. So I had my brother's family over, and they are very, big football fans, and they do their own thing. And I made them play this game called Caverna, which is your dwarf family, and you're trying to build out your cave and your farm at the same time, and you're competing for points. And they were looking at me like, this is going to be really dumb. By the time we were done, his entire family, his two boys, him, his wife, they were all standing and yelling. Don't do that. That's mine. They got so completely animated. They absolutely loved it. And that was, to me, even if I had no professional linkages or whatever, that's totally worth it. To be able to have those kind of memories with your own family or with your friends.
Yeah, it's great. The other game that we didn't mention that we probably should mention is Sid Meier's Civilization, which is on game number 8 or something like that.
Yeah.
And
there are several board games that are like that, and that's under what's called the 4X genre, which is I can't remember what grow, expand, exploit, conquer, or it's something like that. I can't remember what it is, but that's it's your empire building piece. So,
and again, you can find ways that belie your nature where you can gain a big advantage. I want to negotiate and get along with people. But I've learned that sometimes you got to stick a knife in their back right after you tell them that you're friend, so that they're like, I didn't see that coming. Like you're not supposed
to. There are several games with a hidden sinister element to it. I have one Nemesis that is like that, where you pick two missions at the beginning, and one of your missions that are secret may be, and it plays out just like the movie Alien, where the alien appears in the ship, and you're all trying to work together to survive. But your personal goal may be that player number 3 does not survive for whatever reason, or the ship is supposed to blow up because your corporate message was you're supposed to come back by yourself, that kind of thing. And you're trying to pretend to help each other. Oh my gosh, I thought that one would be a horrible time. We've had so much fun playing the Nemesis. There's a series of them now. The Nemesis series is just so fantastic. And of course the miniatures and the production qualities fantastic. It's a company called Awaken Realms. Great. One of my favorite gaming companies right now.
I love it. Anything in closing? Anything you want to ask me? As always, for coming on. It's always a good time to chat with you. But what else do you want to close with?
No, that's great. I have not been able to play. So I got my second edition of my books coming out. So April it'll be the book here behind me. It'll be we chose a different cover just to make it different, but that'll be my last time writing nonfiction if I can help it. I'm trying to switch over to fiction and stuff more in line with what I want to do during retirement. So
yeah, well, that book, if you guys are a budding intelligence person, that book is a deep dive in a way that will help you understand. You probably won't get most of it because it's going to be above your ability to apply it. But I'm not saying the book is bad. I'm saying the book's wonderful in giving you the basis of knowledge. And then you can start to explore out from that book and find things that make sense. It's tough to pick a reading list for an intel person because it would be infinite. Is what it would be. I mean,
right. Yeah, you end up with stuff like biographies of folks who are deployed, there's a lot of them are not much more than the I Was There books, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
this is actually an academic textbook, which is why it has a huge price tag to it. But I added about 50 more pages. I got into some AI elements of using that in Intel. It's been picked up. I think at least 6 different universities around the world have picked it up. Australia, Belgium, Greece, and since my wife is a librarian, she can show me all the libraries that it's in. It's in the Chinese Army library, and it's in the Israeli Ministry of Defense library. So I got all I can say is I got that going for me.
Yeah, which is nice. All right, everybody, it's the Break It Down show. You're supposed to subscribe. That's how you support the show. So hey, please do that. Sure. We'll be back more. Actually, I have a show later on today, which I think will be interesting. You guys should love that. Erik, anything before you wrap this up?
Nope, good to go. Thanks so much.
Okay. Bye, everybody.